Okay, would you please welcome Nancy Rosenthal, the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Nassau County.
Thank you very much for coming to this forum for the Comptroller, the office for the Nassau County. If everyone would please move as close down to the front. I know that's going to be for many of you up higher to move down. It will be easier for the candidates and also for the setup of the forum here in the theater. So it'd be really nice if people started standing up from up there on top and coming down, please, to the front. Thank you. Also, if everyone could please turn off their cell phones. Welcome to this forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to educate and inform the voters. Many of you may not be aware that the presidential debates started in the 80s with the League of Women Voters. Once the media became involved, the League stepped out because it became a little bit more partisan, which the League is not. And from there, the forums have developed, and these kind of forums that we're having tonight are happening, I can guarantee you, across not only this county, but across the state and across the country. So the League is this is a very fundamental activity of the League, and we're really proud to be able to do this for the voters. Lisa Scott is our moderator tonight. She's the president of the League of Women Voters of Suffolk County. And Mary Soft from Smithtown is the timekeeper, and she is right in the front. I wanted to remind all of you that on the ballot that you will be voting on November 5th, there are 6 state ballot issues. And up at the front of when you came in, there was this brochure. This is a League brochure that was created up at New York State, and it lists the ballot issues as well as some of the pros and cons and all about it. We hope that you'll get this and read through it. We also want to let you know about another trademark of the League is the TRI. They represent you. This is the one for Nassau County. It is also up on the front. It has all the way from the president all the way down to the towns and villages, how to contact the people that you voted into office. I wanted also to mention Vote 411. The Nassau County Vote 411 will be going live on Tuesday, October 15th. You will be able to go on to vote411.org, type in your zip code, and those candidates that you will be voting on will come up. Additionally, League of LWV of Nassau County, you can go on that site, and you will be able to see all of the races throughout Nassau County, as well as those ballot issues I mentioned before. Lastly, I just want to mention that on November 14th, Thursday, we will be having a post-election supper with Ellis Hennigan, a Newsday columnist and author of New York Times bestsellers. It will be at 6 p.m. at the Ethical Humanist Society. It will be a lot of fun. He will give a critique of and lively discussion of the election, which at that point will be over, and we'll be celebrating who we've elected into office. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa, who is going to explain the procedures and the way that the forum is set up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome to all of you. As Nancy said, I am going to go through the procedures that were agreed to by both candidates, and I'll go through a few other things beyond that. First of all, just to reiterate, I am a resident of Suffolk County. I do not vote in Nassau County. When I heard I might be moderating this, I became totally immune to reading anything about this race. I hope I pronounced the candidates' names correctly. I am not following it. The point of this debate is to educate yourselves and all those who are watching the live stream or read about it later on. So we want to hear what the candidates have to say about issues that are of importance to the residents of Nassau County. That's why you're providing questions. We have 3 vetters here. What they're trying to do is find the questions about a particular issue, group them together for me so we can have a coherent conversation with the candidates. There are restrictions to the amount of time. We also are very careful about keeping on that schedule. If a candidate needs a few seconds to complete a sentence, obviously that's logical and good. We are not, however, going to play fast and loose with the timing. We respect your time and particularly the candidates' time and their expertise, and we do want to hear from them. So they drew lots to determine the order of speaking. Mr. Weitzman will initially open. When the questions are done, I will be alternating between the candidates. If you want to write a question, we will be taking those cards throughout the evening. So please raise your hand, and volunteers will be going through the audience and picking up your questions. The questions should be confined to issues in the campaign, and please make sure that your questions are succinct, to the point, and not personal. Initially, each candidate will be allowed 3 minutes for their opening statement. After both candidates have spoken, I'll start with the questions from the cards. Both candidates will answer the question and will be given 1.5 minutes. So if Mr. Maragos gets a question, he will have 1.5 minutes, and then I'll go on to Mr. Weitzman, and then we'll reverse with the next question. Each candidate also has a red card. This card is used if a candidate wishes some additional time to rebut a response. They will hold the red card. I'll recognize them after the other candidate has finished their statement, and they can use it 3 times, 1 minute each time. Mary Zoff, as Nancy said, from Smithtown is the timekeeper. She'll be holding up signs to alert the candidates as their time winds down and when the time is up. There will be 2 minutes left at the end for a closing statement from each candidate, and they'll speak in reverse order from the opening statement. Again, no props, charts, visuals are permitted. Also, clearly no campaign literature is allowed. What I'd like to do at this point is, because there are people who are very passionate about one or the other of the candidates, and we don't have any interruptions in the debate. We don't have applause until the very end. So at this point, I'd like you to welcome both of our candidates with cheers, with clapping, whatever you want. And that's the last I want to hear from any of you until the very end. Again, we appreciate the time that's being spent in this hall by these candidates, and we do want to hear from both of you. So at this point, Mr. Weitzman, you drew the first draw. Can we have your opening statement?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the League for hosting this debate. I'd like to thank Malloy College for making this beautiful facility available to us. And I'd like to thank all of you, especially all the students sitting all the way in the back, for coming down tonight to listen to what the issues are concerning Nassau County. I'd like to first reintroduce myself to many of you. I served as Nassau County Comptroller from 2002 to 2003. I was the first CPA ever elected to that position. I served 3 terms as an unpaid village mayor. I had a 35-year career as a healthcare financial analyst and CPA. I think that my term in office was known for hard-hitting audits, and including in those audits special districts, which had never been audited before, independent financial analysis, and the Nassau RX drug discount program. Under my 8 years as the county's fiscal watchdog, the county had a record of 13 surpluses, 8 balanced budgets, 8 straight surpluses with balanced budgets, 13 bond upgrades. When I left office, the county had a stable outlook from the rating agencies, and we were rated the #1 financial turnaround, municipal financial turnaround by Governing Magazine in the United States. Tonight you will hear Mr. Maragos speak as if he lives in an alternative universe. He will attempt to claim credit for everything that's happened in Nassau County over the last 4 years, except for the football Giants going 0-5, things for which he had no responsibility. But please listen carefully. No one validates his wild claims except for his own press office. He's attempting to run away from his record, but every independent outside source confirms that the county's financial condition has deteriorated under his watch, and he's issuing misleading financial reports to hide the truth. If I'm returned to office, the first thing I will do is hire qualified professionals. The attorneys and CPAs that I had in office were replaced by political partisan hires. I'll restore confidence in the county's financial reports. No one ever questioned the veracity of my reports for the 8 years that I was in office. I will conduct the office with transparency and openness, creating a website to put all of Nassau County's financial reports, budget information, and public records online, so freedom of information requests will be honored. And I'll work with the county executive to repair the county's broken assessment system. George Maragos' term in office has been an unmitigated disaster. He has a record of the county finances collapsing on his watch, 3 bond downgrades with a negative outlook, 2 deficits, including one the Comptroller is trying to hide from, county finances taken over by a state board, NIFA, a record level of outstanding debt. He claimed his first priority would be to fix the assessment system, and we now all know that it's more broken than ever. Don't believe me? Look at your tax bills. We cannot afford 4 more years of George Maragos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weitzman. Mr. Maragos, you have your opening statement.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank the League of Women for hosting this debate, and of course, Malloy College for making this phenomenal facility available. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've heard is untrue, complete fallacy, and an illusion. The press had described 4 years ago that the county financials were on the brink of collapse, and today we have had 4 years of no property tax increase. That sends a strong message to the business community and certainly to the homeowners. They know what has happened. Their bills have not gone up for the property tax, the county property tax portion, for 4 consecutive years. 4 years ago, the county was faced with a mitigated disaster in our financials in our county. We were the highest taxed county in the country, the highest taxed county in the country. Today, we have lost that dubious distinction. We are no longer the highest taxed county in the country. Because we have maintained or held the line on property taxes, we have sent a strong message to the business community that Nassau County is business friendly. We want our companies to stay here. We want our companies to expand here. We have created over 19,000 jobs. Our unemployment rate is down to 5.9%, the lowest in the state. There's been restored confidence. People are working, they have money, they're out spending, shopping. Our sales tax revenues have gone through the roof, up 9% alone this year. They were up 5% last year and 4% the prior year. Our county financials are stable. They have improved substantially. Our cash balance has increased by 35%. Our borrowing has been reduced by 50%. The previous administration under this controller had borrowed over $2.6 billion to fund their wasteful spending. They had drawn down our savings, the county savings, by $340 million, depleting them down to less than $60 million to fund their wasteful spending. And it didn't end there. They were planning. They had introduced a 3.5% energy tax that was punitive to our seniors, that was driving them out of their homes. They were planning to raise property taxes 3.9% every year for the foreseeable future. They gave us 250,000 a year cops in Nassau County. That is unaffordable. And labor agreements that go out to 2015 with 3.5% increases. A mitigated disaster, ladies and gentlemen, they have left this county with.
Thank you, Mr. Maragos, for your opening statement. We'll go to the first question, and Mr. Maragos, this would go to you, and then Mr. Weitzman will follow 1.5 minutes each. Newsday reported today that NYFA has serious concerns about Nassau County's finances and and projects a budget deficit of $122 million in 2014, with growing gaps expected through 2017. How is it that the Comptroller projects the county will end 2013 with a $41.6 million surplus? How are voters expected to understand this and reconcile such an imbalance with what NYFA is saying? Mr. Maragos?
Newsday, as usual, has got it all wrong. Their numbers are wrong. The $41 million surplus was an audited surplus delivered in 2012. We projected for 2013 $5.6 million, so we're still in 2013. They also confuse, and apparently, as my opponent doesn't know the difference between budgetary and GAAP accounting. Budgetary, and by the way, NYFA indicated that on a budgetary, which is cash basis, and we all know cash is king, we will be ending with a surplus. What NYFA has elected to do in their accounting on the basis of GAAP, disallow a number of revenue sources that historically have been allowed in budgetary and are taken into account in budgetary form. But if we even look at from their point of view of their NYFA presentation, under the previous administration in the last year, the NYFA presentation would have resulted in approximately $250 million deficit. So if they're projecting 122 for 2014, that's about 100% improvement. So on a cash basis, which is what the county manages to, which is what the county legislature approves, which is what NYFA approves at the beginning of the year, we are declaring surpluses after surpluses.
Thank you, Mr. Maragos.
Yes.
Mr. Weitzman?
Well, I think that that's just an indication of how delusional some of the discussion about Nassau County is. The issue about Nassau County's budgetary results and being in accordance with GAAP is significant because Nassau County promised that by 2015 they would have a balanced budget in accordance with GAAP. And as NYFA pointed out, they're over $100 million away from that. In fact, NYFA said the other day, and for those of you who don't know what NYFA is, it's the Nassau Interim Finance Agency that now runs Nassau County since 2011. They said that based on the reports that they'd seen, that they would probably be running Nassau County for the near future, certainly at least for the next 4 years. But I want to go back to some of the points that Mr. Maragos made earlier. He's very proud of the fact that borrowing was reduced last year by what he said was 50%. What he didn't say was they tried to borrow $1 billion more, but got turned down by the legislature and by NYFA. So it certainly wasn't for a lack of trying. It just was for a lack of permission that the borrowing was turned down. And as far as taxes go, I'll refer my comments to that later. But the real issue is, are you paying more in your tax bill today? And if you opened it up this week, as many homeowners did, you found that the average tax increase on school taxes, because of the county's assessment mess, went up 21% over the last 2 years. Don't believe me? Look at what they wrote in Newsday. Look at what the school board associations pointed out about all the school increases. And for the students back there, ask your parents what their school bills contain.
Thank you, Mr. Weitzman. Just turn it so the audience can see.
Oh,
okay.
red. Oh,
yeah.
Red and blue.
Okay. Again, what the red card means, and you're allowed 3 uses of it, is that the individual may rebut, and they will have 1 minute. It doesn't mean they each get a minute. At this point, Mr. Maragos is using his card. 1 minute.
What you're going to hear a lot, and you've already heard it on a number of occasions tonight, in misrepresentations by my opponent, intended to confuse you and to mislead you. It's true your school taxes have gone up. The county has no control over school taxes. The state does. The superintendents 56 of them that earn close to $500,000 a year with their support staff are responsible for those school tax increases. Your county has not raised your property taxes for 4 consecutive years. Look at your tax bill. He also attempts to mislead you by confusing budgetary and GAAP. On a GAAP basis, they had left $250 million deficit in 2009. So assuming that NIFA is correct at $122 million negative, that's 100% improvement. The county is more financially sound. It is moving in the right direction. It is borrowing a lot less money because we've reduced and eliminated the waste and mismanagement in government.
Thank you, sir. The next question from the audience. We'll start this question with Mr. Weissman. The county's sewage treatment plants are in an abject state of disrepair. Over the last 10 years, hundreds of millions of dollars were approved by the legislature and secured from other sources to repair and upgrade the plants. The requisite funds were bonded and secured. Engineers examining the plants over the repairs were never affected. Where did the money go?
Well, that's a great question, because the Bay Park sewage plant has been a cause of great concern, especially to the people who live in that area. Bay Park sustained substantial amount of damage by Superstorm Sandy. But even before that, it was well known in Nassau County that Bay Park needed to be significantly upgraded and improved. The legislature, during my term, did set aside monies to start that improvement. Significant amount of monies, I would add, that the community in Bay Park has been asking ever since, what happened to that money? The fact of the matter is that the administration and the present controller have never really satisfactorily answered that question. Where is the money? I wish I could answer that question right now. I can't. Vote for me on November 5th. I'll get you an answer.
Thank you. Mr. Maragos, your answer, please.
The Bay Park sewage plant, as well as our infrastructure throughout the county, was a mitigated disaster when we came into office. Their maintenance, especially the sewage plant, were neglected for 8 years. Neglected for 8 years. That's why they were susceptible to damage, and that's why we have spent considerable money, a total of over $300 million in the last 4 years to maintain those plants. And we've spent a lot more money in capital improvements throughout the county to make up for the neglect of our infrastructure and our facilities that they neglected for 8 years when this controller was in office.
Thank you. The next question from the audience, and this, Mr. Maragos, will go to you first. A good comptroller is not afraid to go against the county executive. Can each of you give examples of when you have gone against the county executive?
I have many examples. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, when we issued our budget report for commenting on the 2014 budget, I think hopefully you've all read it. We took issue with the amount of borrowing and indicated that $230 million that was in the budget proposed for borrowing to pay for property tax refunds next year be reduced to no more than $50 million. We opposed the original deal with the Coliseum because we thought it was a bad deal for the taxpayers involving 100% taxpayer financing. I went against the administration and successfully at that in every aspect when they attempted to put a structured settlement to pay the $300 million in property tax refund, and I called it that it was nothing more than a loan, borrowing, adding to the debt of the county. But more importantly is that not only often when it was important and we couldn't resolve things in private, and I had to go public, in many other occasions I negotiated, I sat down with the administration and came to solutions that would be in the best interest of the county financially and our taxpayers, saving them hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weitzman?
Thank you. During the period that I served as Nassau County Comptroller, the county executive Tom Swazi, those of you who remember that period of time know all the scars that I have on my back for the issues that I took publicly when I thought it was in the best interest of the taxpayers. The Comptroller's Office is the independent watchdog elected by the people of Nassau County to represent them directly. I think what you just heard from Mr. Maragos, I'll just give you one example of how he's trying to misstate the facts. In 2011, he stood with Mr. Maragos to swear that the 2011 budget was balanced. They did that to try to avoid a takeover by NIFA. That was unsuccessful. NIFA did take over the county in 2011. He lacks the independence and is becoming nothing more than a mouthpiece for the county executive. That's not the role of the Comptroller. The Comptroller is independent, does not report to the county executive, does not report to the legislature, but just reports to the people who've elected him in Nassau County. As far as his previous comment about throwing the schools under the bus because they were responsible for the tax increases, it's been reported very widely that the schools were under a tax cap and their increase over 6 years, over 2 years, was limited to approximately 6% countywide, compared to a 21% increase countywide that resulted from the mismanagement of the assessment system. Again, don't believe me, don't believe Mr. Maragos. Ask your parents about their school tax bills. Read Newsday and see what they were.
Thank you, sir. The fourth question, again, these are all from the audience, and this one will start with Mr. Weitzman. 3 parts.
All right.
Why is the assessment system broken? What have you done about it? And what would you do about it?
Well, assessments have been a concern in Nassau County for a very long time, especially since the reassessment that took place in 2002. The administration, and with Mr. Maragos staying silent, has exacerbated the problem by, number one, they froze assessments in a declining market, which meant that even though your house value went down, your assessment was frozen and you had to challenge it every year. And more important and more destructive was in the last 2 years, they approved almost 90% of all the challenges that were made on tax grievances. Now, that may sound like a good thing, and for a lot of people, it was a good thing. But what they never said was who was paying for that money. The fact of the matter was, for every dollar that was decreased in school taxes to the people who filed challenges, a dollar was increased for school taxes for the people who didn't file grievances. At the end of the day, the big winners were the lawyers and the firms that were hired to file these grievances. Everybody in Nassau County lost on this. But there's a reason why Nassau County had such a huge increase in school taxes. And it was not the fault of the administrators. It was not the fault of the superintendents who were working under a state-mandated tax cap. And the fact is, they published all of their numbers, so it's transparent. You can see it online and see what their actual increases were and what the increase related to the assessment follow-up was.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Maragos.
The property tax assessment in Nassau County was completely broken in 2009. When we took office, they had an assessment system that they had paid under this controller $50 million, and they had nobody knowing how to operate it. They did not even have an operating manual to use the system. Completely broken. They were spending $115 million in refunds at the expense to the taxpayer. We have made significant improvements to the tax system. That expenditure has been reduced to less than $60 million annually from $115 that they were wasting in taxpayer money. There's still work to be done on the commercial side, but the residential side has been improved. The people's grievances are being heard. They are being settled fairly. And what he's proposing to do is that we take away the right, the privilege that people have to grieve their tax assessment system. There is nothing more un-American than that, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, there is still work to do on the commercial side, but we have made substantial improvement. And again, I stress, we are not responsible for the school taxes. The tax cap that is in place has a number of loopholes that results in school tax increases going up 4-5% above the 2% tax cap that our voters are deceived to vote for. And that is, again, because to support the $500,000 superintendents that we have, 56 of them.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weitzman has raised his red card.
Yeah, there were a couple of issues that you brought up. First of all, I never, ever said, and I challenge you to produce any statement where I did say that we should take away the right of people to challenge their taxes. What I did say was that the county moved the burden onto those people who didn't challenge by granting close to 90% of the challenges that were put in place. So let's be clear about that. Second of all, this $50 million that you're talking about was spent by a Republican assessor who was elected in a general election in 2001 or 2002, and it was only until 2008 when the administration got rid of the elected assessor and had an appointed assessor that they were able to make strides in fixing the system. Newsday published a chart which showed how the assessment challenges went down from 2002 to 2009 until the Mangano administration froze assessments, and now they're at assessment challenges, and now they're at record highs. So the facts fly in the face of what your statements are.
Thank you. Moving on to a different question, and this one will commence with Mr. Marigas. What is your office doing to support women and minority businesses?
We have taken a very strong policy in my office, as opposed to being the passive backroom accounting office that my predecessor have. We have, one, diversified our office. We've appointed the first African-American deputy controller. We had, I believe, a woman, Joy Watson, as my other deputy controller in charge of audits and special projects that left us about a year ago when she was appointed proudly a judge. We have promoted a number of minorities within the controller's office as part of our outreach to our minority communities. So we have a very diversified. We have women, we have African Americans, we have Hispanics in our office, reflective of our community at large. And we are taking major initiatives in order to ensure that our minority businesses are brought into their fold and in a very affirmative action basis to create opportunities and make sure that they receive a fair share of all the contracts being awarded by the county. And we will be announcing an advisory committee that will ensure and be an oversight that 20% of all contracts work be awarded to minorities.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weitzman?
Well, I appreciate the fact that you did hire the previous mayor of the village of Hempstead as a minority hire. But please take a look at the pictures on the wall. You'll find out that Jacques Gilles was a deputy controller who I appointed in 2002 with a PhD in economics as my first deputy in charge of audits. As far as other minorities, your own communications director, Justin Hernandez, who's Hispanic, was hired by me during my term in office, as well as Manny Mosquera, another deputy who was in the office. We actually had more women than men working in the office. Not that that was what we were trying to do, but we just hired the most qualified people that we could find. As far as your recently announced new initiative to try to steer more business to women and minorities, I think that's an excellent goal, and I think the county should strive very hard to try to achieve that goal. Unfortunately, your office has absolutely nothing to say about that. It is not part of the contracting process. The contracts are given out by either the county executive or the legislature, and you have no ability and never have turned down a contract because of the fact that they didn't meet minority hiring goals. So let's get real about what the controller does and what the controller can't do.
Okay, we have a red card. Mr. Marigas, 1 minute.
This is reflective of the very passive and attitude of the previous controller, and why our county had over $300 million that we discovered of unneeded contracts, wasteful contracts that we put in place. This controller wasted 8 years pursuing special district consolidation without delivering a single dollar of saving to our constituents. This is the person that's maintaining that the county is responsible for the school taxes, which is patently wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, the county controller has a lot of authority, a lot of responsibility. We are part of the approval process. I refuse to approve contracts which she did not, that had no value. Refused to approve contracts. The county executive could have said, if you don't like it, sue me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Another red card.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 minute.
Two things that I want to point out as far as your comments go. With respect to special districts, for example, we never pursued consolidation. What we did do was the first controller ever to audit those special districts. And as you know, since those reports are all on your website still, pointed out millions of dollars in waste, fraud, abuse, and outrageous nepotism that existed during that period of time. So maybe in certain areas, certain neighborhoods might have wanted to pursue consolidation, but it was the controller's job to examine those districts, and I was the first one ever to do that. And it was really a black day in Nassau County when you stopped doing it. It might have been because one of your deputies was the attorney for some of those districts. I'm not sure.
We'd like to get some more clarifications in on some of the numbers. So there are several questions, touch on a little bit of some things that were said earlier, but in light of these questions, let's go through them. This next one starts with Mr. Weitzman. There's been a lot of discussion in the county executive campaign about $2 billion of, quote, new debt. The concept of, quote, new debt is unclear. How has the total debt situation of the county changed since Mr. Maragos took over, and how much of this change is actually new debt?
Well, there's an old expression, numbers don't lie, but liars can use numbers. And the issue about debt is a perfect one. On one hand, a candidate can say, well, the outstanding indebtedness of the county went down by $10 million or $12 million. That may be true. But the outstanding debt of the county went up because they owe so much money they can't even borrow to pay it off. So what do you count as what you owe? What you actually sold bonds for or what you really owe? For example, they owe $300 million for real estate tax refunds that haven't been paid back and haven't been borrowed for yet. They've been borrowing from the state pension system because they can't even afford to pay their pensions. So that's another $100 million. They have signed an agreement with the Police Benevolent Association to give them back all of the wage freeze that they had been withheld for the last 2 years. That amount, when extrapolated to all of the unions in Nassau County, is close to $200 million. That doesn't even appear on the books anyplace. So has the debt gone up in the last 4 years? Absolutely it's gone up. It's just that they're not paying for it and can't find the money to pay it.
Mr. Maragos?
Mr. Weitzman is fabricating numbers to, again, mislead you. If you were to look at the audited financial statements, audited by the Deloitte, which is the firm that he hired, you will see that the long-term debt of the county has actually gone down by about $10 million. Comparing 2009, the financial statements, the audited financial statements in 2009 versus the financial statements audited at the end of 2012. So it has gone down by $10 million. The $2 million that Swazi has been advertising, and I called him out, I flat out called him out a liar, because it is a lie. The total amount of new borrowing has been, under this administration, has been $1.3 billion, not $2 billion, versus $2.6 billion in the 4-year under this controller's administration. And from that $1.3 billion, most of it has been used to roll over debt and not add to the long-term debt of the county. So everything you've heard is a fantasy, it's false, it's fabricated. And it's outrageous for a controller, a CPA, to attempt to use numbers that are not audited, that are not written to mislead the public and the voters. Outrageous.
Let's get to a specific question which does not include actual dollar numbers. And that is, starting with Mr. Maragos, Nassau County has had serious financial problems for decades. What are your plans to address the long-term debt problem without seriously burdening homeowners with more taxation?
Well, again, that's another fallacy that this administration, this controller, has been trying to perpetrate on the public. It is true that our total debt is $3.5 billion, approximately. It's a little less than that. Mostly, as I indicated, put on the books by the previous administration and this controller. But $3.5 billion is a very manageable debt, ladies and gentlemen, when our budget is $2.8 billion. That's about 1.2 to 1. Put it in the context of your own finances, your family finances. Most people have mortgages that are 3 or 4 times the family annual income. Ours is almost 1 to 1. It's very manageable. We are not drowning in debt. We have a borrowing capacity of close to $19 billion. $19 billion. Again, $3.5 billion is a lot of money, but it's very manageable, and it has been reduced under this administration, and it will continue to be reduced without raising your property taxes. And that's the commitment that we are making, that the county executive has made. And you know what? Because we have caught the waste and the fraud that was pervasive under the nose of this controller for 8 years, we have not only not raised property taxes for 4 years, but our cash balance, the county savings, has increased by $30 million.
Thank you,
We're
sir.
healthier today than we ever were as a county.
Thank you. Mr. Weitzman?
Well, let me start off by saying it's very easy to increase your cash balance when you put all the bills in the drawer and don't pay them. I indicated before $500 million in unpaid bills, whether they're pension bills, whether they're termination pay, whether they're certiorari or real estate tax refund claims. All of that is just sitting out there. That's why your cash balance may be going up. But getting back to the borrowing, I can't believe the statement that you just made about how $3.5 billion is not an extraordinary amount and it's fine for Nassau County. It's twice as large as the nearest county in New York State. Twice as large. The average indebtedness per person in Nassau County is $3,000 per person. $3,000 per person. No other county comes close to that. I think Suffolk is approximately half of that amount. And Westchester, who has the dubious distinction of having the highest taxes, we're second. But Westchester is approximately half as much as Nassau County as well. So while we agree that the objective needs to be to reduce the borrowing for Nassau County, we definitely disagree that we're at a fine level and we're not drowning in debt. The fact is that this administration for the last 4 years has financed their operations through debt. As I pointed out earlier, whether it's debt for pensions, whether it's debt for real estate tax refunds, even when police officers and county employees leave the employee of the county, they have to borrow to make up for their termination pay. And I would point out to you about the police contracts that you said were so egregious. They were voted on and passed by the current county executive, Mr. Mangano. That happened while he was in the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weitzman. Okay. Another detailed question, and this one would start with Mr. Weitzman. Please explain how or why funds received from borrowing are being treated as revenue in county financial reporting.
Whoever asked that question, please leave the room right now. There's 2 types of reporting that governments work on. One is a budgetary basis, and the other is GAAP, or Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. Under GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, borrowing is not included as revenue. Borrowing is borrowing, revenues are revenues. The fact is that under the Knife Act, for the county ever to take back control of its own finances, they have to balance their budget, bring the county within structural gap by 2015, which, as you heard earlier, is not going to happen. It may not happen in this decade. The budgetary basis, though, is in accordance with different sets of rules. Some of those rules interpreted by NIFA. So, for example, in the previous administration, NIFA did allow the county to count borrowings for real estate tax refunds as revenue and charge them as expense when they were paid off. That ended in 2008 under the Knife Act and is no longer in presence right now.
Thank you. Mr. Marigas?
I hope you understood that answer, because it's very confusing. You have to be a CPA. The fact of the matter is that that's where NIFA is, and through Newsday, by the way, Newsday doesn't understand GAAP accounting, so they misrepresent. Because of the budgetary and the GAAP analysis, it's important for people to understand that there are different measures. One includes the borrowing, the other doesn't. And what I've tried to communicate simply tonight is that under both accounting methods, the county has substantially improved its financial condition. On a GAAP basis, it has gone from, because this borrowed money has been excluded, from about $250 million negative to less than $100 million deficit, over 100% improvement. On a structural gap, which is the other measure that the county has used historically to exclude borrowing sources, we were left with $250 million deficit in 2009, and we're down to less than $50 million gap, almost a 90% improvement. So under both measures, the county financial position has dramatically improved in the 4 years that I've been controller, and will continue to improve.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do is kind of go off the cards for a minute, and because listening on the outside, since I'm not voting in this election at all, you're in a college. There are students here that potentially are not taking Accounting 101 and perhaps didn't take any higher math in 11th or 12th grade. And for the people who are watching the live streaming of this elsewhere, they probably would not get their arms around different accounting methodology. If you had to give them a succinct, clear understanding of, is there a problem that the Comptroller of Nassau County can help with? What is that problem and what should happen? Okay? Yes? All right, so this one would start first with Mr. Marigas, simply.
Yes, there is. The biggest problem and the biggest responsibility that the Comptroller has is to restore financial confidence in the county government, in our institutions, to hold the line on property taxes and invite businesses to stay here, to expand here, to relocate and create jobs for our young people that will pay good salaries. And that's what we've done in 4 years. By holding the line on spending and property taxes, we have sent a very strong signal out to the business community that we want you to stay in Nassau County. We want you to expand here. We want you to relocate here. Consequently, our unemployment rate is down to 5.9%, the lowest in the state. The county is doing well financially. Our revenues are up, and we will continue to send that strong message of business friendly. The Coliseum is an excellent example, of attracting investment. It's going to be an exciting facility that's going to stimulate our economy, and that's just the beginning, because after the Coliseum, there's 70 additional acres that need to be developed into a high-tech, biotech facility that will bring in billions of dollars of investment and create thousands of jobs for our graduating college that will be high-paying jobs. So the future looks promising, looks great here in Nassau County because of the steps taken by this administration
Mr.
and this
Marigas,
Comptroller.
I'm going to give you an extra 30 seconds because you didn't answer part of my question, and then I'm going to give 2 minutes to Mr. Weitzman. And it is specifically about the Comptroller, because it is possible that the Comptroller will be of one party and the county executive another, and they may have different goals. So give us 30 seconds about the role of the Comptroller, because you both have occupied that position in that question about the issues out there. Not the full administration,
right,
but specifically
no, I believe
the
I understand.
Comptroller.
The role of the Comptroller is to be the chief financial officer of the county, to instill confidence in the business community to instill confidence in our residents that we are moving in the right directions, that our kids have a future here in Nassau County. It all stems from fiscal responsibility, financial responsibility, and having a healthy business environment.
Okay, thank you. Mary, you'll give Mr. Weitzman 2 minutes then, please.
Well, I have to say I'm surprised again. After 4 years in office, you still don't know what the role of the Comptroller is. The Comptroller is not the Chief Financial Officer in Nassau County. Look it up in the charter. The Chief Financial Officer in Nassau County is the Treasurer of Nassau County, who's appointed by the County Executive. The Comptroller is a financial watchdog. There is a difference. There is a major difference, and it's time that you understood what that difference was. We both agree that it's very important to restore credibility with respect to Nassau's financial statements. That's a critical issue, and it's one that I've talked about a lot because I don't believe they have a lot of credibility right now. But as opposed, again, to listening to me or listening to Mr. Maragos, I want to quote something that a member of the NIFA board said, George Marlin, who headed up conservatives for Ed Mangano, and is about as conservative as they get. The county has no credibility because time and time again in dealing with fiscal matters, the county has been disingenuous, deceptive, and delusional. Now, that's not me saying that. That was quoted in the newspaper at a public meeting in the transcript of the meeting. Now, I can say that the role of the Comptroller is to instill confidence in the county's financial statements. That's why we never had a question while I was in office for 8 years about what the numbers were. There were questions about policy. Politicians always disagree about policy. But there were never questions about what the numbers are. Now, all we do is spend our time arguing about what the numbers are because nobody has any confidence in the statements that are coming out of your office anymore. Now, what could the Comptroller do? Specifically, the Comptroller can work with the County Executive on the assessment system because that has to be fixed, and whether it's a Republican County Executive or a Democratic County Executive, it doesn't really matter because once the elections are over, you get down to governing and politics has to move to the side. The Comptroller also can put together distinct, clear analysis of the county's financial statements so that they can be understood by the general public.
Thank you, Mr. Weitzman. Mr. Maragos has a red card, 1 minute to rebut.
You just heard the difference, a very passive, uninvolved Comptroller as to what the responsibilities are. And that's why we had so much abuse and waste within government when I took over. And he points to the Treasurer. The Treasurer, one of the first things that I did was audit the Treasurer. And you know what we found? We found that they had 130 bank accounts that they were not even reconciling. And he was in office for 8 years as the watchdog. 130 bank accounts with millions of dollars that were not even being reconciled. The job of the Comptroller is to be an active participant in government, to be involved in all the fiscal policy decisions, to try to guide the county in the right direction of fiscal responsibility so that our taxpayers do not end up with higher and higher property taxes as we are seeing in the schools.
Thank you. Mr. Weitzman also is using a red card.
I would just say that if that's the role that Mr. Maragos sees for the Comptroller, he should have run for County Executive because that's clearly not what's set out in the Charter, and the Charter is the law that governs Nassau County. The Charter is very clear about who the Chief Financial Officer is. The Charter is also very clear that the Comptroller is not part of the governance of the county with respect to the legislature or the county executive, and that's why he's considered an independent financial watchdog. You can't be at the table making policy and then be independent at the same time. You've got to pick one side or the other. You're going to represent the taxpayers or you're going to work with the administration, but you can't do both at the same time.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question from the audience, which will start with Mr. Weitzman. The sales tax revenue the county receives has significantly increased over the last 4 years. And again, I'm reading the card. Why hasn't the county increased sales tax revenue sharing with local local incorporated villages like Rockville Center, Hempstead, Lynbrook, et cetera? Mr. Weitzman?
That's a good question, and whatever trustee asked that, I congratulate you. During the previous administration under Tom Swazi, they instituted revenue sharing of sales tax for the first time. A small portion of the sales tax was set aside and paid over to the local governments. I was a former village mayor. I know how important that is. Local governments don't get sales tax, and they really rely extremely heavily on property taxes. So any relief that they can get from sales tax is welcome relief. But let's talk about sales tax for a second. Mr. Maragos appears to be taking credit for the increase in sales tax by 9%. Now, the sales tax increasing is a good thing. We all know most of that money came from repairs due to Superstorm Sandy and was front-end loaded in the first half of the year. Some of that will continue as we go on, and I hope the sales tax does stay up. But to take credit for it when county government represents such a small part of Nassau County spending is a little bit over and beyond, I think, what you would expect out of the office. Similar to the unemployment rate. Nassau historically has always had one of the lowest unemployment rates in the state. But that's got nothing to do with how they run the Comptroller's office. It has to do with our proximity to New York City, the great educational systems that we have out here, such as Malloy College, and the tremendous opportunities that our residents have for employment. To say that the Comptroller's office or even that the county executive has anything to do with the unemployment rate is an exaggeration. When you bring a business over from Melville into Nassau and move 20 jobs from Melville to Nassau, you haven't accomplished anything.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Maragos?
Well, let me tell you why I take credit for some of these things. What happened, if you recall, with Hurricane Sandy, our economy was devastated. For 2 weeks, economic activity had come to a halt. We jumped, the county executive and myself, we did not hesitate. We borrowed money, we used our funds to go and help people recover, to redo their electrical wiring, their heating systems, to have people move back into their homes as quickly as possible. And our economy recovered very rapidly, much more rapidly than Suffolk, much more rapidly than New York City. Nassau County does not march to the same drummer as New York City. Our unemployment rate has come down to 5.9%. New York City is still close to 8%. There's a difference. Suffolk County is almost close to 7%. There's a difference. So the actions, the policies, the initiatives that I have helped working with the county executive implement has been beneficial to all our communities. And what you hear is a controller that says, I'm not responsible for anything. All I need to do is sit back and examine the books. And under his very nose, we have 130 accounts in the treasurer's office with millions of dollars, millions of your dollars, that nobody's watching over, that are not even reconciled. That's the difference between myself being very proactive, taking initiatives, and somebody who sits back and says, it's not my responsibility. It's not my fault.
Thank you, sir. What I'm going to do is take about a 1-minute break. I'd like the candidates to be able to take a sip of water. And when we commence again in a minute, I'm going to extend the red card thing by one more red card because we have several more questions. So 1 minute, your patience. And if you have any other questions, please raise your hand so someone will come up and collect them if you need clarification of anything that was asked earlier. Okay. All right, would everybody sit down again, please? Thank you again. Each candidate will have one more red card. That'll be 1 minute, and we'll go back to the questions. And at this point, the next question will go to Mr. Marigas. What have you done, or what did you do to uncover waste or fraud in county government?
Unlike my opponent, who focused on looking at special districts without any benefit to the county taxpayer for 8 years, the focus of my administration was to look internally to make government more efficient. We've audited most departments, and we found substantial waste and abuse. And we did not stop there. We insisted that that waste and abuse come to an end. We also drew upon my management consulting experience to help departments reorganize and become more efficient. Some of the findings that we found were simply appalling, that were left over undiscovered by the prior controller, costing taxpayers millions, tens of millions of dollars. We found, for example, that the county had 8,000 employees, yet in this day and age of cell phones, we had 19,000 landlines that we were paying for. 19,000 for 8,000 employees. We did an audit of the LIPA bill, and we found that there were 300 meters that didn't belong to the county. Waste, fraud, under this controller's very nose. We looked at social services, we looked at housing, and we found rampant waste and abuse of money. And that's why, and the total that I estimate is $300 million in savings to the taxpayer on an annual basis.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you. Albert Einstein said that the definition of insanity was trying to repeat the same action over and over and trying to get a different result. Mr. Marigas tried that same line of $300 million yesterday at the Newsday editorial board. And I think when they pressed him to actually come up with a dollar amount that made up the $300 million, he came up with $9 million. It turns out the bulk of that $300 million was a savings that he estimated based on the difference between what inflation was and what he thought that the prior administration was going to spend. So it wasn't real money. It was just budgeted money that you thought was budgeted. Furthermore, the dollars that were involved, the bulk of those dollars were the NIFA wage freeze of over $200 million. All right? If it hadn't been for the NIFA wage freeze, spending in Nassau County would be off the charts, and so would our taxes, and so would our debt. So let's not take credit where it's not due. But in terms of the audits that you're talking about, the audit of the Treasurer's Office, you reissue the audit that I did before I left office in 2008. The audit of the telephones, you reissued one of the first audits that I did in 2003 when I was in office there. I can point to actual money saved. $25 million we saved by eliminating the double coverage in health care for people who are married to other people in the county, legislatively approved in every union contract. I can also point to $100 million saved for taxpayers on Long Island by reducing the increase in health premiums paid to the state, $11 million of which flowed directly to Nassau County.
Thank you, sir. Again, question from the audience. So hopefully I'm phrasing this correctly. This one would start with Mr. Marigas. If a business assessment goes down, residential goes up, why shouldn't a challenge go both ways? So if an assessment is judged too low, it's raised.
We have to abide by state law that says, you can lower the assessment, you cannot raise it. Okay. There is substantial improvement that can be made to the assessment system. And in some aspects, that would require state legislation. We have asked for changes to state legislation to allow us a margin of error of 15%. Because right now, if you're wrong even by 5%, you have to reduce the assessment. And most professional appraisals, as you know, no two appraisals will give you the same appraisal for the same property. the same house. And both academic studies and professionals tell you that if you're accurate within 15%, plus or minus 15%, it is a fair assessment. And that's what we want the state to allow us, Nassau County. If we are correct within 15%, not to allow us to deny those appeals, those grievances. And by the way, most of the grievances that were settled are being settled by 8 to 12%. So a 15% margin of error that is professionally accepted and recommended will almost eliminate all of the grievances and certainly go a long way to significantly improving, if not eliminate, the assessment issues that we continue to have that are costing still Nassau County about $60 million a year.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weitzman?
I don't understand. Mr. Maragos is trying to have it both ways. Earlier on in the evening, he said I was trying to take away the right to people to challenge their taxes. And now you just heard an example of how he's going to propose a plan that will eliminate the right of most people to challenge their taxes. So it's one way or the other. Either you think they should all be allowed to challenge their taxes, or they shouldn't be allowed to challenge their taxes. As far as the shift goes between commercial and residential, that is complicated, and it is greatly misunderstood. I was part of an effort that lobbied the state where we limited that shift to 1%. So the shift can go either way, but it can't go more than 1%. What's happening, though, is there are a number of commercial conversions taking place where commercial properties are being converted to residential. That can cause a bigger shift, but on the other hand, you have more residential properties to pick it up. I don't expect anybody to understand what I just said, but the fact of the matter is, it is state law, and it's much better than it used to be.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Red card.
Yes.
Okay. 1 minute.
What we keep hearing from my opponent here is that he doesn't understand. Yesterday at the Newsday board, editorial board, he heard something that did not happen, so he imagines what I said or did not say. Now he's taking credits for audits that he tries to recall that he did in 2002, 2003, where you had the waste persist to 2010 and 11. Now he's talking about that he heard me say that I want to deny people the right to file a grievance. I don't think I said such a thing. I said that people should have the right to grieve. But if the county has done a good job and has fairly assessed a piece of property, if within that appraisal margin, we should have the right to say your house is reasonably arranged, we've done the best job possible, the same as your neighbor, therefore you should not have an advantage over your neighbor.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Mr. Weitzman, this question starts with you. What did the 2009 NIFA report state, and why did NIFA take over?
Well, NIFA took over in 2011, not in 2009.
Well, that's the question.
So I'm not exactly sure what 2009 report you're referring to. If you're referring to the reasons that NIFA took over in 2011, it's because, as I pointed out earlier, the structured gap for Nassau County on a gap basis in 2011 was more than 1%, which is the trigger amount. So in the case of Nassau County, that had to be more than $27 million. The fact of the matter was, I think it was $100 million at the time, and that's why they declared what's called a hard control period and actually now control the issuance of all debt and the issuance of all contracts in Nassau County.
Thank you. Mr. Maragos?
Yes. Just think how ludicrous it is for anybody at the beginning of the year to predict and to take strong action on the basis that a budget at the end of the year will be off by more than 1%. Completely ludicrous. We all know that budgets can vary. It's the responsibility of the county executive to make adjustments throughout the year as revenues come in better than expected or less than expected, and expenses come in higher than expected or lower expenses, to finish the year in balance. So the original action by NIFA was completely political motivated. Secondly, the gap, on a basis of gap, the deficit in 2009, as I indicated before, under NIFA's measurements, was $250 million, $250 million. And ours, as my opponent indicated, was reduced to $100 million because all these other sources of revenue were excluded. And yet, they were very supportive and turned a blind eye to my opponent and decided, with a vast improvement in the financial condition of the county, to take control. Totally politically motivated.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, which I'll expand on a little bit. Question as written is, as chief auditor of the county, can you tell us what or who your department has audited? I'd like to expand that a little bit in terms of adding sunlight to this. On the state level, the state comptroller creates an email, a little web report every week saying who's been audited and what the findings are. Does that exist in Nassau? Should that exist in Nassau? How much of this is public record? How much of it are confidential records? And this one would start with Mr. Marigas.
All of our audits are distributed to the state comptroller, to the district attorney, to all the legislature, and are posted on our website, and of course to the media. So there is complete transparency. We also do a press release for the benefit of the public of every audit that we issue to highlight the major findings. But again, as I indicated before, we don't stop by just issuing press releases and documents. We follow up to make sure that our findings and recommendations are implemented so that the taxpayers benefit in terms of eliminating waste, eliminating fraud, or implementing productivity improvements within government, again to the benefit of the county. And that I see as a very important function of the Comptroller's Office, to follow through and make sure that waste and fraud is put to an end.
Thank you. Mr. Weitzman? Well,
I agree with Mr. Maragos on something at least. With respect to the transparency issue, the Comptroller should release the reports to the press. They should release the reports to the DA's office. They should release them to the State Comptroller, the affected agency, the county executive as well. And I know that that's taking place now because I trained Mr. Maragos as communications director, so I know what kind of job he's doing. With respect to the areas that we did audit, they're too numerous to mention here. I'll just go through the big ones. We audited the Corrections Department, pointed out how it was being abused on overtime. We audited the Police Department in a number of the areas in police. We audited probation and found out that people who were being monitored, the monitoring service only worked 9 to 5 days a week, so that people who had ankle monitors weren't being monitored on the weekends or at night. We audited the Parks Department. We audited social services, found out that there was a 1,000-page directory on how much to charge for taxi cabs. And when taxis were being used to go to Long Island Jewish Hospital, they were going in the back door, which was in Queens, for $100, instead of going in the front door, which was in Nassau, for $40. We probably did more audits in those 8 years it's ever been done before. And I think most of those audits are still listed on the Comptroller's website.
Thank you. The next question, actually I've received this question in a couple of different formats, and Mary, I'd like to give them each 2 minutes on this, because I really like some specifics and a little more elaboration. And they both relate to what or would you do to help promote minority business. So again, this is not as county executive, this is as comptroller, what's in your power, and also speak a little to the point of what are the issues facing minority businesses in Nassau, particularly as the demographics of the county changes. Are there more opportunities or certain things that can be done through your offices? And we would start that one with Mr. Maragos.
Yes, as I indicated before, my office has been very innovative and very progressive in reaching out to minority communities in terms of encouraging them to come forward with their issues. I believe I've made the office an advocate for minority issues. I've indicated that we're taking the initiative through the contract process to insist on 20% set aside for minorities. And also, in the past 2 years, when the county legislature and the executive had decided to cut back on some of the social service programs, for example, to funding for nonprofits and the youth boards, I seized the initiative and undertook studies that proved that for every dollar that we invested in our youth board programs, the county received $3 in benefit. And those dollars were restored to the benefit of our minority communities. And I will continue to do so. And certainly the 20% set aside is going to go a very long way to help our minority communities that are economically depressed. They suffer from very high unemployment, to bring them into the mainstream and make sure that they have jobs, able to support their families and afford their homes.
Thank you. Mr. Weitzman?
Well, as I said earlier, I think a 20% set-aside is a very reasonable goal and should be something that the legislature and the county executive ought to bring up. And I suggest if Mr. Maragos is really serious about it, he should write to them instead of just saying it in a political venue, because he can't implement it on his own. He has no way to direct contracts. And it sounds nice in a political forum, but the reality is he can't do it. The problems that minorities have are pretty well known. When you're dealing with government, it's very complicated. There are bidding requirements, there are insurance requirements, there are bonding requirements, and it's difficult for minority businesses who tend to be newer and short of capital to meet those requirements. And one of the things the Comptroller can do is to work with them to mitigate those problems and to help them overcome those issues. There are a lot of ways to skin a cat if you're qualified to perform on a contract. Bonding, the Comptroller's office can offer advice on how to obtain bonds where you can't obtain them. Same thing for financing, where there are county agencies that can provide financing. We insisted during the last administration that all contracts for bid be posted on a website, so that anyone interested in bidding on county contracts now has access to the same information and can actually go out there, which tends to put local residents on a more even footing, especially when the previous practice had been to award most of the contracts to politically connected insiders. So there's a lot that can be done. I think a set-aside is a great idea, and I certainly personally would support it, but I think the way to implement the set-aside is to write to the legislature and write to the county executive instead of standing in front of an audience and making a political statement.
Thank you. The next question from the audience has two parts. One, do you think we can resolve the issue of ever bringing back the Islanders to the Coliseum? Or is Nassau County going to be building new office buildings at the new Coliseum? Comment on that. We're back to 1.5 minutes. And Mr. Weitzman?
Well, wishing and hoping, but that's not reality. I don't think the Islanders are coming back. I think Mr. Wong has had his fill with the politics in Nassau County, unfortunately. But I want to talk about the Coliseum a little bit. Clearly, something needed to be done there. But I think we really needed to show a little bit more foresight and a little bit more vision in terms of what went in. Right now, all we're going to do is refurbish the Coliseum and leave most of the property open for some future development scheme, which we really don't know what that's all about. Further, the individual who was given the contract to renovate the Coliseum was the same individual who stole the Islanders and built the Barclays Center. So what was his first proposal? Shrink down the size of the Coliseum to almost ensure that a Major League sports team will never again play in Nassau County. So I think, should that plan stay in place, and if there is a change in administration, everything in life is negotiable, but should that plan stay in place, I don't think we'll ever see, on a permanent basis, a Major League team playing in the Coliseum again. The Islanders, I think, have committed to playing either 6 or 11 games, home games, in the Nassau Coliseum after they permanently move to the Barclays Center. I think that's a good thing for the Islanders fans, but the Coliseum is being developed. We'll never see Major League sports again.
Mr. Marigas.
I'm an optimist, as opposed to my partner being, or my opponent being a pessimist. I believe the facility that we have is, is a grand facility that we all going to be very proud of. It's going to be a sports venue, entertainment, convention by one of the best operations in the country. I believe we're going to have more than 6 Islander games back here. I believe we're going to have Nick games back here. The facility is going to be an exciting facility that we, our Nassau counters, will be proud. The rest of the facility in Nassau County, it's not going to lie a wasteland as it is now, as it has been for 8 years under the prior administration. As I indicated before, there are exciting plans to invest billions. The developer has been designated to build a high-tech biotech complex that's going to create thousands of jobs and billions in investment. So the future is looking bright for Nassau County, ladies and gentlemen. And we just need the right leadership to make it a reality.
Thank you. We've gotten several questions about school districts, and there's one, though, that raises an interesting twist, because we know that the comptrollers don't control school districts. But this one says they'd like to know your perspective on group buying power, consolidating the purchasing and other financial situations in some way with school districts. So in other words, perhaps 2 North Shore, 2 South Shore instead of 57 separate ones. And I do want to go back to Mr. Weitzman because I missed my order here, so you're due for a starting question.
Could you just repeat the last part
Yes,
of that
please.
question? Because I wasn't clear what you said about 57 districts. Versus
Yeah,
one.
instead of 57 separate purchasing decision makers, let's
Right,
put
right.
it that way, what's your opinion, and is it feasible in some way?
Well, under County Executive Swazi's leadership in the first 8 years, we did bring the school superintendents in and did start to put together plans to have them combine some of their back office operations. It was clear that they had no interest in combining any of their educational resources, but we did talk to them about combining their back office operations, computer operations, purchasing, as was pointed out in the question. Actually, even accounting and auditing services were discussed. I went out of office after that. I don't know how that was followed up on, but there are some opportunities with respect to that. But it's not totally true that the comptroller has absolutely nothing to do with schools. Many of you may remember the Roslyn school scandals that we had in 2005, where school superintendent and back office manager were accused of stealing, and actually were convicted of stealing tens of millions of dollars from the Roslyn School District. Well, I worked with the then state controller to put together guidelines for school boards on educational training for school board members, on rules of conduct for school board members, on the creation of independent audit committees for school boards, so that we can mitigate the possibility of those things happening again. There are bad people out there, and unfortunately bad people do bad things. But it's up to all of us as public officials to try to reduce that opportunity for people to steal from the public good, because in the end of the day, they're stealing from our children.
Thank you. Mr. Marigas?
I think I've alluded to it, but let me be a little more direct. I believe we need to consolidate some of the superintendents that we have, multiple, 56 of them that we have, earning up to $500,000 a year, to bring about a real change and sanity to our schools, without sacrificing and possibly improving the education of our kids. Those dollars should be going to the education of our kids in the classroom, and not to $500,000 superintendents living out of the county, up in Connecticut or in the city or wherever they live, being chauffeured to the office. I don't think that's the image of the superintendents that we have. So unless we change at the top, we're whistling in the wind. Nothing will change. And it's an issue that we have to address, because the property school taxes are skyrocketing. Our seniors cannot afford them. Our kids, our young families cannot afford to stay here in Nassau County. It is becoming a critical issue that will need to be addressed in the next 4 years, and not in cosmetic ways. but in very substantive ways that will bring about real savings without compromising the education of our kids.
Thank you. We have a red card from Mr. Weitzman.
We definitely disagree on this issue. When Mr. Maragos was running for the U.S. Senate, he stated very publicly that if he got elected, the first thing he would do was eliminate the Department of Education in the federal government. I don't think that shows a real concern for the education of our children. Furthermore, Mr. Maragos has publicly stated on radio that he looks towards New York City as a guide and a model for what we could do in Nassau County. Maybe not one school district like they have in New York, but 2 or 3 or something like that out in Nassau County. Well, if there's one thing we can all agree on, is that we have great schools here in Nassau County. That's why people come here, to get great educations. We can do better. The minority schools need to perform better, and we need to do whatever we can in those areas to help them perform. But to talk about eliminating school districts in areas like Seaforth, Wantagh, Merrick, Belmore, where the entire community revolves around their schools, I think is ludicrous. Further, I was on the Governor's Commission for Efficiency in Government, and we found that the entire savings in consolidating schools in the county would be somewhere between 3 and 5%.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we can't get to all the questions from the audience. Several of them touched on subjects that were covered already, and a number of the others related to issues that would have been interesting to explore but don't come within the domain of the responsibilities of the Office of Comptroller. So we have one closing question, and then we'll go to the closing statements. And this closing question will start with Mr. Weitzman. Each of you have seen the others' administration of the Office of Comptroller. What is the best quality or initiative or achievement of your competitor that you would emulate in the next term?
Well, let me start off answering that question, which is hard for me to answer, by stating that I had a conversation with Mr. Maragos when he first came into office and said to him that he was in a unique position because he really hadn't been elected with any party support, that he was elected independently on his own, and he should take advantage of that to be a truly independent financial watchdog. It all went downhill after that, because the first hire he made was the head of the North Hempstead Republican
I
Party.
will interject at this point, because this one, I really want both of you to answer the question. Okay, it really is one positive, and I will give you more time to finish that thought, but something positive or an initiative, okay? And then in your closing statement, you can address the issues that you're passionate about.
Well, the one positive thing I can say that I have seen Mr. Maragos do is he has tried to chastise the administration for borrowing too much money. He has indicated that he stopped borrowing, which he didn't, because he doesn't have the power to do that. But he has publicly written that the county is borrowing too much money and needs to cut back on its borrowing.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Maragos, I expect the same, please.
No, absolutely. One of the things that I think that I complimented the controller, that the civil service staff that he had working in the controller's office were first-rate professional. They were CPAs, they were attorneys, very dedicated professionals, excellent public servants, apolitical. And I thought that was wonderful. All of them, I think most of them, I kept. I did not fire a single one of them. A number of them I've promoted. And so I think that's a legacy that the prior controller should be proud, and I was thankful to find professional staff and office and the quality of the people that were there.
And gentlemen, I do appreciate your forthright nature, your passion, your desire to do a good job. You've both done excellent jobs in your terms. I hope this evening that those in attendance here and those that will be watching the recording will have learned something about your positions, your skills, your talents. At this point, we'd like to give each of you 2 minutes for a closing statement. And again, with the straws drawn, Mr. Maragos, if you would give your 2-minute statement first, and then Mr. Weitzman.
I believe you heard two very contrasting philosophies and management styles here tonight. My opponent doesn't remember, lays back, takes no responsibility, it cannot be faulted for anything. On the other side, I've been a very active, very progressive controller, brought about real, significant, beneficial change to the controller's office, made it more significant, more powerful, delivered results for the taxpayers. I've been very instrumental in helping restore the confidence and the financial stability of the county, and having done so or helped to do so without turning to the taxpayer for more money. I brought to county government my 35 years of private business experience and a philosophy that comes with that government needs to live within its means, government needs to meet its obligations, but government needs to be a very beneficial force for change within our communities, to make our communities better, to serve our communities. I think we've laid the groundwork in the first 4 years, establishing stability, credibility, and I think we're in the next 4 years would be very exciting in terms of making government even more efficient, a higher caliber of service to our community, but again, without asking our taxpayers for more and more money. And we will see as a result of that single policy that our economy will continue to boom, our unemployment will continue to remain low or decrease, and our young people will be able to find rewarding, well-paying opportunities in Nassau County. And we also intend to help them find affordable housing, which is one of the major issues that is driving our young people away. So I look to the next 4 years with a lot of optimism and exciting to serve you, the voters and residents of Nassau County.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weitzman, your closing remarks?
First of all, let me start off by saying I'm very proud to be running on the Democratic ticket this year with former County Executive Tom Swazi, District Attorney Kathleen Rice, and Rockville Center's own Laura Gillen. I thought you were going to clap when I said Laura Gillen. It really was the greatest honor of my career to serve for 8 years as the Nassau County Comptroller. I'm running for this office again because, like many of you, I'm deeply troubled about the direction of the county's finances. Every single outside independent financial source, including Newsday, the Wall Street Journal, and members of NIFA, the Independent State Control Board, have been critical of Mr. Maragos and the county's financial management. Mr. Maragos has stood here tonight and tried to convince you that everything in Nassau County is fine, and things are actually improving. This is in the face of 3 bond downgrades and a negative financial outlook by the rating agencies, which will probably lead to further bond downgrades. As late as yesterday, NIFA reported a projected deficit for 2013, 4 more years of deficits over $100 million starting in 2014, and no end in sight to financial controls. I want to read what Newsday said about the county's financial reports. By the accounting rules that are both standard for government and demanded by the Nassau Interim Finance Agency, the county is running a huge annual deficit and incurring increasing liabilities. At such a time, publicizing surpluses is a purely political move that does nothing to serve the taxpayers. I have the professional experience as a former controller, CPA, with experience in the healthcare field to clean up this mess. If elected, I promise I'll work every day towards that end. Nassau is a great place to live. We have everything. Great facilities, beaches, great healthcare systems, great schools, great colleges like Malloy College. We have everything going for us except for a broken government. We cannot afford 4 more years of George Maragos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the candidates for coming tonight. I would like to thank Lisa and Mary for coming. I would like to thank all of you for coming. I would like to thank the many people that helped put this evening together. Judy Jacobson, wherever she is, she did phenomenal, and Barbara Epstein, who is not able to be here tonight. I would also like to thank Malloy for all that they have done to make tonight possible for us. So now the most important thing all of you have to do is to go out November 5th and vote. Get your friends, get your neighbors, get your family, get everybody you know who has the right to vote to exercise that privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you very much.